1902, at a cemetery in Middle Egypt called Nuwayrat, archaeologists opened a tomb cut into the rock. Inside was a skeleton, the body placed in an enormous clay pot. He had been dead for close to 5,000 years. His remains later crossed the sea to Liverpool. Researchers could study his bones and teeth, but the most important record he carried remained unread. For more than a century, nobody could reach it. Then, in 2025, DNA from one tooth produced the first whole genome sequence from ancient Egypt, a man who lived near the beginning of the Old Kingdom as the Pyramid Age was taking shape. The first result was clear. Most of his ancestry was best represented by ancient people from North Africa. This was not the genome of a recent outsider who had arrived to build Egypt for the people already living there. But a substantial second signal pointed east, toward the Fertile Crescent. Archaeologists had seen that connection for decades in crops, animals, pottery, and imagery. Now, for the first time this early, it appeared inside an Egyptian body. The missing story was no longer whether Egypt had contact with the East. It was how that contact had entered Egyptian family lines before the Great Pyramids rose. His date is unusually important. He lived roughly 47 centuries ago, only a few centuries after Upper and Lower Egypt had been united. The first Great Pyramid projects were either approaching or already underway. Cleopatra still lay more than 2 millennia in the future. This was Egypt near its dynastic foundation. His burial suggests that he held some status. Placing a body inside a large pottery vessel and setting it within a rock-cut chamber was not the ordinary treatment at Nuwayrat. Compared with many people buried around him, he received unusual care, which makes the condition of his skeleton strange. His joints and spine were heavily worn. Years of repetitive physical stress had reshaped his body, the kind of damage caused by doing the same demanding work again and again. One possibility is that he was a potter, although the evidence is circumstantial. Bones record strain, not job titles. So the burial preserves a contradiction. A man treated with distinction after death, yet marked by hard labor in life. His teeth add the rest of the picture. He probably lived into late middle age, perhaps close to 60. Chemical traces in his enamel fit a childhood in the hot, dry Nile Valley, while his diet included wheat, barley, animal protein, and possibly fish. Nothing in that record identifies a recent traveler. This landscape had formed him. Egyptian heat usually destroys ancient DNA, but the heavy pottery vessel may have slowed that destruction just enough. An unusual burial had become the first whole genome witness from the dawn of the Pyramid Age. And its first ancestry story ran west, across Africa. Roughly 78% of this man's ancestry was best represented by Middle Neolithic people from North Africa. The closest available ancient comparison came from a site in present-day Morocco, but that does not make the Nuwayrat man Moroccan. Ancient DNA models can compare him only with genomes that have survived and been sequenced. Here, the Moroccan group is the best available marker for ancestry that may once have been shared more widely across northern Africa. It is a genetic proxy, not a modern identity label. That distinction changes an old argument. Past theories often assumed that a civilization as sophisticated as Egypt must have been brought in by a separate conquering population. The Nuwayrat genome points in the other direction. Its largest ancestry layer fits a deep North African background, reinforcing archaeological and biological evidence that local people made a substantial contribution to early dynastic Egypt. This is one man, not a census of the Nile Valley. More early genomes are essential. But the first one does not support a foreign population sweeping in and replacing the people who were already there. The old invasion story cracks here. The genome also offered a cautious sketch of the man himself. Researchers predicted brown eyes, brown hair, and skin pigmentation in the dark to black range, while warning that such predictions are less reliable for ancient populations poorly represented in modern databases. Those traits belong to this individual, not every Egyptian face across 3,000 years. The ancestry result is stronger than the portrait. Most of his genetic story belonged to North Africa. Most, not all. About 22% of his ancestry was most closely related to Neolithic people from the Eastern Fertile Crescent, including Mesopotamia and the surrounding region. This was not a faint echo. It was the second major component needed to explain his genome. That does not mean a Mesopotamian ancestor walked into Nuwayrat one generation before he was born. The connection could have entered his family line centuries earlier, arrived in several movements, or passed through people in the Levant whose genomes have not yet been found. The DNA identifies the affinity. It cannot provide an exact date or route. Even with that uncertainty, the historical picture shifts. Egypt and Mesopotamia had left traces of contact long before this man died. Domesticated plants and animals had spread into the Nile Valley from West Asia. In the centuries before political unification, Egyptian objects and imagery began showing parallels with the wider Mesopotamian world. The pottery wheel appeared, long-distance trade intensified, and the earliest Egyptian writing emerged during the same broad age of experimentation. But object can travel without whole populations moving. Ideas can be copied, and technologies can be adopted by people who never met their inventors. Until this genome, the human side of that exchange remained hidden. This genome closes that gap. People moved too. Their ancestry was already inside Egypt before the Old Kingdom. That finding does not turn contact into conquest, and it does not show that outsiders created Egypt. The geography and the timing point toward a slower process. The Nile Valley was difficult to reach, but it was never unreachable. To the northeast lay Sinai and the Levant. Red Sea routes could connect travelers with Arabia and networks extending toward Mesopotamia, while the Mediterranean offered another path along the coast. These were demanding journeys. Yet over centuries, they carried animals, seed, stone, timber, craft knowledge, and human beings. One possible window opened in the Neolithic, when farming, herding, pottery, and more settled ways of life spread into Egypt from West Asia. Another opened later, as exchange between pre-dynastic Egypt and Mesopotamia became visible in elite objects and new technologies. The genome does not choose cleanly between those windows. It records the result after the movement had already happened. That makes the conclusion narrower, but also more important. The DNA supports real human migration between the Eastern Fertile Crescent and Egypt before the Great Pyramid Age. It does not support a mass arrival that overwhelmed the people living along the Nile. In this early genome, North African-related ancestry remained the clear majority. Contact had turned into ancestry, quietly, over generations. But Nuwayrat is a single frame near the start of dynastic Egypt. The next surviving frames come much later, after kingdoms had risen and fallen and foreign rulers had repeatedly taken control of the country. Those later bodies reveal whether conquest remade the population beneath it. At Abu Sir el-Melek, another cemetery in Middle Egypt, mummified people preserved DNA spanning from the New Kingdom through the Roman era. Their lives crossed periods of Libyan, Kushite, Persian, Greek, and Roman rule. On paper, that history looks like a recipe for repeated population replacement. The genetic evidence told a more measured story. Across the long period sampled at that one community, the maternal lineages showed no major break. Genome-wide data survived from only 3 individuals, and those later Egyptians were closer to ancient populations of the Near East, especially the Levant, than modern Egyptians were. The new Nuwayrat study adds another comparison. The ancestry of this early man could not, by itself, explain the later genomes. By the third intermediate period, a significant increase in Levantine-related ancestry had entered the picture. Both findings can be true. A local community can persist while additional people join it. Foreign kings did not need to replace an entire population for migration to leave a genetic mark. Political control can flip in a single afternoon. Family history changes one marriage, one settlement, one generation at a time. The ancestry of there is a hard limit here. The later mummy evidence comes from one site in Middle Egypt, while ancient Egypt stretched hundreds of miles north and south along the Nile. People near the delta, in the western oases, or close to the Nubian frontier, may have carried different ancestry patterns. These are narrow windows, not a census of a kingdom. Still, the windows reveal a direction. Later, Egyptians retained ancestry related to earlier North African sources, while additional Levantine connections became more prominent. The last comparison lies not in another tomb, but in the population of Egypt today. Present-day Egyptians still carry ancestry related to ancient North African and Egyptian sources, but the living population is far more varied than any burial site could capture. The new analysis found substantial differences among Egyptians today. Geography and community history have left distinct combinations. The comparison with the Abusir mummies exposed another shift. Modern Egyptians carried about 8% more ancestry related to populations south of the Sahara than the genome-wide individuals from that cemetery. The study placed much of that increase after the Roman period, while leaving its exact causes open. Greater movement along the Nile, long-distance trade, and the slave trades linking Egypt with regions farther south and west may all have contributed. That later increase does not erase earlier ancestry. It adds another layer to it. Nuwayrat gives the first early whole genome point. The later mummies show a stronger Levantine connection. Modern DNA reveals further African connections and pronounced diversity within Egypt itself. The evidence is now in order. Its meaning comes down to what the Nile did across every period. The tooth from Nuwayrat did not reveal the DNA of an entire people. It gave us the first whole genome view of one man from early dynastic Egypt, and his ancestry carried a clear pattern, a predominantly North African background, joined before his lifetime by ancestry connected to the Eastern Fertile Crescent. Later genomes show that other Levantine and African connections accumulated over time. So what did scientists uncover about the ancient DNA of the Egyptian people? Not evidence of an imported civilization, and not a population sealed unchanged behind the desert. The strongest picture is a North African foundation shaped along a connected Nile artery. The river fed Egypt and concentrated its population, but it also carried people through the continent and toward neighboring worlds. It was not a wall, it was an artery. That is why modern racial categories fail so badly here. They demand a border where the evidence shows a history. The man in the clay pot was local to the Nile Valley, connected through ancestry to lands beyond it, and fully part of the civilization forming around him. His genome does not make ancient Egypt less African. It reveals how an African civilization could be deeply rooted without ever being isolated. Which part surprised you most? The North African majority, the Eastern Fertile Crescent connection, or the later changes visible in Egyptians today? Share your answer in the comments and subscribe for more stories hidden inside ancient DNA.